Hello everyone, welcome to live stream for the 3rd of April. This is I suppose it's a little bit of an anniversary today because it's 2 weeks today since I started doing these daily streams. Just making sure that I'm live and everything is running. That we're going. Hello Olaf, nice to see you. Hi Georgia. So this is streaming daily at 3 p.m. painting, 3 p.m. UK time. Today, basically, I'm just doing this while we're all on lockdown because I'm going to be painting anyway. So I have a streaming set up for teaching, so it seemed like a good idea to be doing this every day. Hello, Irene. Hi, Alison. Please let me know in the chat and put a comment in if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, just to let me know if you can see me okay and if you can hear me okay. I think I've fiddled with the mics a little bit, and I think I might have turned one of them down too much. Hopefully it should be alright though. So let's get straight on with the setup. Here's the painting. Did I do a little bit on it? Maybe I did a little bit more on it yesterday after we finished the stream. I don't think so though, not much. Thank you, Kathleen. Hello, Diane. Nice to see you. One can see and hear you fine. That's good. Hello, Marcella from Ireland. You're very, very welcome. Thank you. That's a very nice thing to say. Let's change the cameras around, move them around a little bit, I think. Over there a little bit. I'll bring up the reference. Now this is, I'm not actually painting from this photo, but this is a photo I took of the flowers yesterday. They've actually opened. I'm painting from the setup just in front of me here. This is just to show you what I'm working from, and if you wanted to have a go as well, then you ought to be able to paint fairly well from the photo reference. But what's interesting is, I didn't think the flowers were going to change that much, but they've really opened up overnight. So that's given me a challenge. So I've got to decide whether I'm going to paint more with what they were yesterday or more with what they are today. And what I will generally default to painting closer to what they look like now. But the colours won't have changed. The colours will still be largely the same. So I've got the colours out on the palette already. Let me tell you what I've got here. The same setup I've been using for a lot of these daffodil paintings. Actually, I'm painting a series at the moment. Titanium white. This is Michael Harding Bright Yellow Lake. It's the pigment is PY3. This is Michael Harding Bright Yellow, no, Yellow Lake, sorry. And that's PY74, Hansa Yellow, a lot of paint manufacturers call that. Yellow ochre. Any yellow ochre would do. Michael Harding Green Gold. Don't think there's a substitute for that. Williamsburg Quinacridone Gold Brown. Don't think there's a substitute for that. Show you how I use those when I start mixing. Michael Harding Quinacridone Rose. Just a blue-red, opaque, semi-opaque blue-red. Ultramarine. These are for the pattern on the teapot. Raw umber. Ivory black. And this is Windsor Green Yellow shade, which is basically a phthalo green, which I can mix a little bit, as I discovered yesterday, with the yellow and black to make a sap green that I've been using lately, and have discovered as of yesterday that I no longer need to use it because I can mix it. just as well. Going to the light today is, it's been semi-overcast to bright, and it's just come out into full sunshine, so I'm going to drop the exposure of the camera a little bit blown out. Control them from the laptop, which I have beside me while I paint. Drop. 2. Hello, Christy. Hi, Renee. Nice to see you. Hi, David. Ginia, nice to see you. Hello. Hello, Diane. Vancouver Island. I haven't a clue where that is, but you're very welcome. Hello, Deborah. Nice to see you. So I'm thinking about, so these flowers have really changed now. They're much bigger, basically. They're taking up much more space, which is kind of nice, I think, for the composition, because it means this area here is going to be... That's still a bit wet around here. I probably want to be taking that out as much as I can, because I'm going to put just a small amount of terps on that. Because I'm going to need to... Just this, all of this background around here I want to take out, because all of this is going to change now. Because the flowers are very much different place than they were. Just taking up more space, really. So I'm just looking, and these flowers have kind of come together much more, these two here, and opened out a little bit. So I just don't want to be painting onto, I don't want to be trying to paint these very light colours of the flowers onto the background, because it will mix with the background, and I'll lose the cleanliness of the mixes. And as you know, if you watched me before, I like to keep, I'm very particular about the colours. So mostly I think what I want to do at the moment is to set up the flowers. So I'm going to paint them in a really simplified way to start with, just light and shadow, just colours and shapes, and see how they're working in the painting overall, and then go from there. So I'm going to start by mixing. So for the radial petals, these are the shadow colours. The reason I've got 2 out is because they're somewhere between the two. These are both higher chroma and lower chroma versions of the same colour. Dolores says, why do you always view looking down on the subject? I don't always. In fact, I've only just started doing it more lately. I went through a phase a few years ago where everything I painted was looking down on the subject, sometimes very steeply. And for a long time I've been working sight size with things almost at eye level on a shelf in front of me. And just lately I've gone back to looking down. The reason I like it is because I like what it does to the compositions. It changes the compositions, you know. This teapot becomes a different kind of shape and occupies a different space in the painting, in the panel. That's mostly why I do it. I like the compositional possibilities. Good question. Kathleen says, could you show the flowers how they look now, please? Let's have a look. Maybe I can. I don't think I can show them close up, but if I bring this up, this camera, and I take the reference off, the problem is that this camera is quite a long way from the flowers. I'll try to zoom in on them. without actually moving the camera. Can you see them there? This is a slightly different angle, of course. Let's see if I bring that up. Bring them into focus. Struggling because I haven't got my glasses on. We're a bit overexposed on this camera. How's that? It's a different angle, so it's slightly down and to the left. Yeah, we're a little bit overexposed, but hopefully that's that gives you some idea how different they are now from where they were. You can see, like, there's my setup, so you can pretty much see. You see that shelf at the back with the two paintings on it, and the vase with the leaves of the daffodil leaves in. That's where I've been painting a lot of stuff lately. Hopefully that helped a little bit. Hello, Daphne. Nice to see you too. Les Paul, more music. Maybe let me have a quick look at the mics. I may have brought one of them down too far. Also, I was standing back there at the camera, so I was away back from the main mic, which is here. Is that better balance now for sound? I'm going to mix up a bit of neutral beside that of the same value as well, so I can, or near neutral, so I can drop the chroma if I want to. So the local, what I'm doing here, if anyone's wondering, these are Munsell chips from the Big Munsell book, and I've found the local colour of those radial petals of the daffodils, and I'm mixing the local, and it's actually in between these two. So this is the local colour, right? That's what I've got here, so I can drop the chroma a little bit of this one a little bit with that one if I want to. And these chips here, I've got two because they're in between the chroma that I need as well. Let's take one out just to make this easier to understand. So so this is the light, and this is the shadow. Okay. And this is how I mostly mix. It's I've gradually simplified the process of mixing color so that I mix a general light and shadow color. And I know that, it's partly by looking and judging, and partly just from knowledge from painting a lot of cubes and spheres and various different objects. is that the shadows on those petals will move slightly towards an orange yellow. It's still a green, but they'll move slightly towards orange. So I picked a chip from the Munsell book, which is the next page around, which is slightly more orange. I'm just mixing a neutral to match that shadow colour. And then, and it's a little bit darker than this. I'm keeping the values very close because I find that's very important for flowers. If the values get too far apart from the light and the shadow, in very light flowers like this anyway, you quickly start to lose any feeling of life, and they become heavy, and they no longer look like flowers. And the chroma will be slightly higher in the shadows, but it's still going to be very low. See where I'm in relation to that. I'm too dark, and my chroma's not too bad, but my I think my colour is too green and too dark. And it takes a little while, you know, to pre-mix the colours this way. But once you've done it, the painting part comes a lot easier, because you don't, I think sometimes people think that once you pre-mix like this, you use only these colours and nothing else. I'm going to leave that chroma slightly high, so I've got some room. And that's not the case, you know. I will use mostly these colours, but I can also use them, mix with these colours. You know, if I see subtle little differences, then I can use them as a starting point to mix those two, and it helps to keep me in a good narrow range of light to shadow. There will be some parts where I want to go really light, but I need to be careful still not to go as light as pure titanium white, because the highlights on the teapot and the glass will be pure titanium white, and they're the lightest parts of the painting. Cameras tend to blow those lights out when you take a photo of them, and these are just so I can drop the chroma and do lower chroma versions. So that's the radial leaves. I'm always calling them leaves. I mean petals, the radial petals. And I'm finding more and more these days that keeping really good control of the values especially is really helping me to I'm just more satisfied with them as flowers, you know. So the trumpets, the light and shadow is somewhere between these two. Sorry, the light is somewhere between these two. I couldn't quite decide. Again, it's like I've got a higher and a lower chroma version. So if I mix the higher chroma version and a neutral, then I ought to be able to drop to the lower chroma version if I want to. Mixing in a neutral doesn't always work. It depends on the hue. Things towards green and blue, it tends to work reasonably well. Things towards orange, not so much. And the shadow of those is somewhere around these two. So that's light and shadow for the trumpet parts. That's a good match for the lower chroma one, but I need a higher chroma too, so I'll add some. It's difficult to add chroma if you already have a high chroma color. It's not so bad if you have a lowish chroma color. So I'm going to mix this to be the higher chroma one. That's good. Mix the shadow. I've got two different values there. I'm going to go for the lower one. Need to come down in value a little bit. Probably not that much. When I'm mixing these days, when I'm painting, sometimes I'll do it like reasonably quickly like this, changing a few things at the same time. But when I teach mixing, I teach doing it, changing one thing at a time, the value, the hue or the chroma. And that's how you really get a handle on this way of looking at color, hue and value and chroma. It's interesting to me that a lot of people now, even though Munsell gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes, and sometimes even people who talk about hue, value and chroma, it's becoming quite natural and popular to talk about hue, value and chroma, even when people don't accept Munsell and look at it as the Munsell system. There is no Munsell system. There are different ways of using Munsell to approach color, you know. Munsell, basically, when you boil it down, is looking at colour from a point of view of its hue, its value and its chroma. That's all it is. There are different ways of applying it. You can see from the work of people that do use it that it's not as if all our work is the same by a long chalk. So I've got radial leaves and trumpet. Let's mix another slightly lower value neutral to be closer to this value here. But for each of these I've got light and shadow. And that's all I've got is light and shadow. And personally I like to approach it like this because it helps me simplify the form. If you want to get really more detailed with it, you can mix colours in between, you know. Like what I do when I'm doing studies of cubes and spheres is I'll often do, which is basically how I learn colour, I often do mix a colour for each of the modelling factors. So I'll have the highlight mixed, the centre light, the halftone, the shadow and the reflected light. Again, it's simplifying, but not quite as much as this. Now, for painting, especially daffodil petals these days, I use these chisel flats. Thanks, Elaine. Actually, yeah, I must admit I'm not feeling better today. This is one of those days where you show up despite the fact that you feel you're not up to it. But the weekend is coming. I'm basically just exhausted. But the weekend is coming, and I would rather be painting than not painting, and if I'm painting I may as well be streaming, right? That's the way I look at it. Okay. It sounds better now. Good, thank you. Hello Lisa, nice to see you. Diane says the Munsell book is very expensive. It's hugely expensive. What I would advise you to do if you want to try this method out and learn something about it, I've got loads of free resources on my site for you to, you can basically learn the way I use this for free on my site. I also have, courses, and well, I have one mixing course and one full color course, which includes the mixing as well. These are online things. But I make a point of giving away pretty much everything too, because it's such a good method and it solves so many problems for people that I want to make sure that I get as much information about it out as possible, because it solved colour for me. David says, can you tell me exactly which chips you have there, just so you can get a mental picture? I certainly can, David. So for the light here, the higher chroma version, this is 10Y 8.54. For anyone who's not familiar with Munsell, that's the hue is 10Y, meaning it's a green-yellow. The value is 8.5, which means in terms of the value scale, it's between 8 and 9, so it's right up here, right at the top. And 4 is the chroma. So the chroma can go for anything up to about 16. No chroma is a neutral. And that's a chroma 4, so it's low chroma. The shadow here, I've overshot the chroma slightly, but it's basically 7.5Y. Now 7.5Y, it means slightly more orange yellow than this one. The value is 7 and the chroma is 4 again. So from the light to the shadow of these leaves, I'm going from 7 to 8.5. Really small part of the value scale. It's challenging to paint in such a narrow range. For the trumpet here, the high chroma light, 7.5Y, it's 8.5, so these are the same value. And the chroma is 10, right? It's more than double the chroma of that one, much higher chroma. The color is the same, right? This is just a higher chroma version of the same color for the trumpets. Gives you incredible control over the color, this way of mixing. Now this is 7.5Y 6.6, so the chroma is slightly lower and the value is slightly lower. Slightly more spread of light and shadow in the trumpets. But I can mix between these, and I can extrapolate mixtures from them if I want to. I can drop the chroma with the neutrals in the middle there. So it gives me really fine control, over the color, which I find flowers are such a challenge, especially light ones, that this I don't think I could paint them without this kind of very fine control. That's a strange comment. Bruce, say something. You may not have your sound on. If you haven't, you won't have heard me say that either. Not much I can do about that. Brenda, you just got the Munsell book. Oh, did you get the student book or the big book? Hello, Carmen. Nice to see you. Hi, John. What, the pattern on the pattern on the teapot, you mean? Yeah, I'll paint it in a very abbreviated way. Let me show you one I've done previously of it. So here's another painting of the same teapot. So I don't paint a lot of detail. I make sure I get the colors right and the shape hopefully right. And I don't actually, I paint it, I suggest it more than paint it. Here's another one. And you see, so I'm after the overall effect of it, so I don't paint all of that detail. What I mostly go for is getting the colors, nailing the colors, and then I find I can suggest it if the colors are right. If the colors are wrong, then it won't work. Michelle says, hello Michelle, nice to see you. Are you painting this one, Michelle, by the way? Michelle's been doing these incredibly beautiful. She won't have this. She won't. I know you won't accept this, will you, Michelle? But she paints these incredibly beautiful watercolor versions of the setups that I'm doing in these streams. And you put me to shame, Michelle, because I can't paint watercolor at all. I don't know how do you manage that medium. It's so hard. You've got to plan so carefully your values. It's fascinating to me, but I'm not good enough painter to do it. So she says 10Y 8.54. So the big book has half value chips, only in some colours. In the yellows it does. At the top of the range, because yellow, everything that happens in yellows is at the top of the value range. So it helps to have, to split the value range there. In other colours it doesn't, no. So it's really just the yellows. It has between 8.5 and 9. Susan says, I think of these tubes of paint as chemistry, science, which sometimes conflict with art and colour. Right and left brain conflicts. Well, I don't know. I mean, the whole thing about right and left brain has been largely debunked, although there is brain localization, so we do tend to use, generally speaking, different parts of our brains. But what happens when we process any skills in our brains is that we use various different parts of the brain come into play at the same time on different sides of our brains. So most skills are a combination of both. So you actually might be closer to the truth than it perhaps seems there. So yeah. Thank you, Ginia. Hi, Vida. You're very welcome. Have a go, Michelle. Yeah. Don't blush. They're beautiful, those paintings. I was thinking I meant to send you a message, but since you're on the stream, I'll just say anyway, I'd love to do a painting swap with you one day. Hello, Olga. Thank you very much. Thank you. Masochist, mostly. Yeah, I think you've got to be a bit of a masochist to paint watercolour, right? I've got to focus down now on what I'm doing and try not to destroy my drawing. I can see things that are out because they've changed so much, and I want to try and get, it's important that I try to get these values in right at the beginning here. I'm just going to take a lot of this out. Very soon I'm going to need to mix the background colour as well so that I can cut into it. In fact, I should do that really now. Now, I put white in my backgrounds at the moment. A lot of people say you shouldn't put white in your backgrounds because it makes it opaque. My personal feeling is that that doesn't matter. The problem with, it is nice to have translucent backgrounds, but the problem with putting white in, especially if you use titanium white, is that you lose chroma. So as long as you're aware of that and you make sure you don't lose the chroma, my backgrounds at the moment are mostly opaque. But as long as I have enough chroma in them, they'll work fine. And actually these days I prefer to paint them more opaquely. Not all of it, but most of it opaquely, because it gives me a bit more control over the colour. You're probably gathering by now, I don't want to leave anything to chance. David, we were talking was it yesterday on the live stream about happy accidents? They don't happen to me. I don't have happy accidents. I have unpleasant accidents that mean wiping out and repainting. That's how it goes for me. Right, that's good and dark. So I'm going to use the smaller brush for the lights. And I'm just going to start by just blocking some stuff in. So this flower now is turned more towards the light, and almost all of it is light. So I'm going to try and work in very general terms to begin with. That may not have changed that much in position. So I'm squinted down, this one has changed. And I'm just trying to look at overall shape for where they are now. Trying not to think about detail, although I am interested in the how can I describe it, the outer contour of the shape. Let's have a slightly more neutral version of this into the light. Around here. All of this is really, really light, this flower. And I'm lining things up mostly with the teapot to try and get them in the right place. Out of oil. This is just cold pressed linseed oil. If I get onto a third session on this, and some of it starts to dry and I want to do like a thin glaze on the background or something like that, then I'll use generally Dave Corcoran's fumed silica medium or oleo gel for that. Just really want to note that the trumpet is here. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Shadow brush. Lisa, you're in New York. Yeah, I feel for you. I do feel for you. Try to stay safe there. And news is horrendous from there. It's going that way for us too over here, but count ourselves very lucky here that we're out in the countryside, and you know, it's in London where the real problems are here. As I'm going into the light for the background, I'm adding a bit more white and a bit of neutral, drop the chroma and raise the value so that I end up with more chroma in the shadows. Still looking mostly for general statements at the moment. Here. This whole area has become a bit too dark. And by the way, you know the bottle is here when I'm painting the background, and most of the time I'll ignore the fact that the bottle is there and just paint the background. You know, to show glass, you really just need to do mostly you have the background colors coming through, and you just need to do a couple of little bits at the end just to show that it's glass, like the highlight and a couple of little details, and it will appear to be glass. Now the shadow parts of the radial leaves of this one on the right, they have more chroma and they're lower value. So I'm going to go over to my trumpet. colour for those. Try and get them something like in the right place. And I want a feeling of light to shadow, like thinking of this as a whole entity rather than three separate flowers. And trying to make sure that I keep a feeling of light and shadow. So the light is coming from this side, so this side is in the light. There'll be differences within that, but just want I want that more neutral actually. The radial leaves, I want it more neutral, so that the shadow of the trumpet there stands out more and possibly, yeah, a bit lighter. Just trying to think in shapes. And the value of the shadow of the radial leaves in shadow, radial petals in shadow here is very, very close to the background. So I want that. That's a little visual check for me. This flower appears to have grown up, this top one. Well, let's go with where it is and it's moved. Or it's moved, or my drawing was really poor yesterday. So I'm just trying to compare the value of this area of this flower with this. It looks fairly similar. So this one is actually moving right out of the composition now. So that's going to change how I'm going to paint it, because I don't want it to. I could change the position, but I'll probably just focus on these two and paint this one more loosely. so you see how I'm going between, this is what I was talking about, the chroma. I'm going between this one and this one to drop the chroma in some parts a little bit. I could raise the value a bit too, go up, down, sideways, you know, in between all of these to try and get some of these. I'm still not trying to paint the thing, I'm not trying to paint the flowers, I'm just trying to paint shapes. If I can make the shapes work, then I quite often find that I don't need to do an awful lot more. So for this flower, the radial leaves have a bit more chroma when they're in the light, so I can borrow a bit of this and bring it over to the light. I don't think it is light though. Just trying to think in terms of the relationships. And if there's anything that I can paint in that's going to be, you know, the right shape roughly and try and get it in one stroke, then that's going to save time. Trumpet here. Let's think about that. Right side. The shadow. And light again. Drop in chroma. See all of these little areas that there's a lot of variation in them, and although I've just mixed particular colours here, I can introduce a lot of variation within this where I want it, you know, by mixing between these colours. But it's keeping me within the range that I want to stay within. It's keeping me from hopefully from making any really big mistakes in terms of value. And it's also giving me a chance to see where these flowers are going to sit in the value balance as a whole. Renee is still waiting for a happy accident. Whoa! No. I find the more extreme care I take over where I put my my colour notes and my brush marks down, the better the result, you know. That's just the way I personally feel about it. I think a lot of the time people look at very brushy paintings and they get the impression that it's done in a dash of inspiration. And personally I find if I'm working more brushy, I need to be even more careful because, you know, the only thing that's going to carry the painting is the values and the colours, and if I don't really nail those, then I'm lost, you know. Or as the Queen would say, I'm lost. Someone was telling me the other day. Apparently that's how the Queen says lost. Lost. I want more light. That area of the trumpet. I have to be careful that I don't get too much low chroma colour into any of the higher chroma colours while I'm changing from one brush to another. That can be pretty disastrous. Because I don't want to have to mix these colours again, you know. I want to be able to make all these statements for these flowers with the colours I have already mixed. I think a deeper shadow. I've gone outside the value range a little bit. Let's hope I haven't just made a really big mistake. So you see, I don't know if it's the same on the photo, but there's just, the trumpet here just pops out into the light a little bit. So, you know, I don't have to worry about what color I need for that because I have it mixed pretty much. I think that one there is slightly lower value and very slightly more towards an orange yellow. So I can quickly change that and then just suggest, if the color is right, it will work, you know. Just put the shape. Worry too much. I'm not worrying too much about detail and painting the thing. I just want mostly the shape. Then a bit lower, more into shadow down here. More light here. And you can just see around the outside of it, there's a little bit of light on the outside. On the further side of the frill of the trumpet. I just kind of suggest without really, you know, a lot of the time I'd like this stage of a painting because this is where I get to see if everything is going to work or not. I think I want more light here. So I'm gonna push it really close to the highlight. That's too much chroma. There's a couple of bits I just want more light. Bring the value up as high as I can without quite getting up to this point, but it's going to be close. That is very light too there. And I'll generally, for this stage, I'll use titanium white because it covers better, and then for little details, sometimes just for the paint handling, I'll switch to lead white. See, that's not enough light. I really need to see how the teapot is going to work against those flowers before I can decide for sure about the value balance now. Guardedly say I'm fairly happy overall at the moment. I'm still thinking about dropping this value. Let's try that actually now. Let's try dropping the background value a little bit. Keep chroma. So this is raw umber, and I'm putting in a bit of this Michael Harding green gold, which is taking it too green, so I'm bringing in a little bit of the quinacridone gold brown. Just wondering if that's too much chroma, so bringing a little bit of raw umber and a little bit of black. Drop the chroma and we'll also drop the value a little bit. I'm just wondering if it might help if I just have a bit more of a value change between these. I don't want to overdo it, but I really want the flowers to stand out in this one. Especially that one on the left. It's not a very big drop. Actually, there's some interesting stuff happening in the cast shadows there. I'm going to do a bit of work on in the shadows of the cloth there. You know, I always find it doesn't matter how tired I am, well, to a point. Once I start painting and I get into this part of a painting where I'm playing with shadow, the value balance and the light and the shadow, I always start to feel energized again. The flowers are looking all right, but I'd like them to, I want to see if I can make them pop a little bit more. And that might just be value, it might just be dropping this value here. Maybe even further than that. Maybe even further than that. I've been keeping my backgrounds a little bit lighter than they appear lately, to do with the value balance of the painting as a whole, but this one, really want them to stand out. So if I look at the actual, if I look closely at the relationship in the subject, then I wouldn't paint the background this dark. But if I squint right down and I look at how those flowers are standing out against the background, then maybe this one is going to be darker. I really want them to stand out. So let's just see what happens. I can always change it later if I feel like it. Oh dear, that hello isn't from me, it means my 6-year-old boy he recently found a way to bypass I don't know how he'd done it, he's bypassed the security I set up on his tablet so he can log on as me. And, and he's taken to commenting on the live streams while I'm live. Oh yeah, I suppose that's a good point. The shapes are kind of, I've got light, a little bit of light to shadow that way too, yeah. I always think, if it doesn't work, you've got to work out the relationships here on the palette. And if you work them out there and get them pretty close there, like I'm thinking about where, you know, for this, I'm trying to make sure that I don't go too light there. You know, because I know I've got to keep these 2 points as the lightest lights. You can do all your thinking here, and then it makes that bit go a bit easier, I think. From Chile, wow, that's very cool. 2 people from Chile. How weird is that? I don't mean it's weird that you're from Chile, just that there's 2 people on one of my streams that are both from the same place. I think that's desperately cool and wonderful and impressive. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, David, I guess. David's saying it's the moment where you put in the shadows and they look wrong, and then you put in the lights and suddenly they work. And that's working it out here first, you know. Daphne says, sorry, let me just read your comment, Daphne. I'd be interested in hearing about the process of evolving from literal thinking, as one often does in the beginning. In other words, changing focus from the details of the object itself to focus on shapes, value, and chroma as you do now. Does that make any sense? It makes absolutely perfect sense. is something that you need to do if you want to paint realism well, is you need to get away from thinking about the thing and think about it in terms of light and shadow, colour and value. And the way to think about colour, I think, is the chroma is hugely important as well, almost as important as value, because they're very closely interlinked. And like if you're doing a portrait, for instance, you see this a lot. And you have to fight the tendency to do it at first, is that you will tend to draw a schematic eye. Like while I'm putting these flowers down, I'll tend to paint a schematic flower. You know, they're buried deep in our psyches, those things, and they will come out unless we're very careful to avoid them. For sure, yeah. Where does that come from? I've found breaking that habit, the most useful tool was to get a framer, to do a lot of drawings, like with charcoal or pencil or whatever, mostly charcoal because you want to work in shape. Get a viewfinder like this. Let me take the extra bit off because I don't need that. With a grid on it, place it over something and just paint the shapes. Squint down and just paint the shapes. That really helps you because this is two-dimensional. And you've got this thing going on when you're painting and you're drawing. It's like a dance between the two-dimensional appearance and 3 dimensions. And you need the 2 dimensions to get the shape right, and you need to be thinking in 3 dimensions to get the light and the shadow right. It comes mostly from practice and from simplifying, and a grid will really help you with that, help you to break those mental kind of schemas and to develop new ones. But yes, that took me a long time. Hello, Steve. Nice to see you. How good, interesting question from Olaf, how good are these print-at-home Munsell books? Honestly, just don't. Because unless your printer is really well calibrated, unless what they're giving you is perfectly calibrated against a Munsell book, they're just not going to be right. I really wish that I had different news for you on that, but I don't. I'm sorry. Hello, Anne. Watching from Boston. I've been to Boston. I really liked it there. I was a little bit north of there, actually, but I went through Boston. And I picked up some nice little bits and bobs of silver from a little antique shop there that I painted a few times since. Hello, Vicky, from California. Yeah, it must be really early for you over there. You're very welcome, Daphne. I'm glad it helped. I've forgotten what I'm doing. What am I doing now? I remember. Oh, I was going to do some work on the cloth, right? There's some lighter parts. Oh no, bugger it. Let's leave that for now, and I'm going to go straight onto the teapot. So this is an interesting thing, right? This teapot has got 2 main local colours. There's a lot of variation inside that, but it's got the white, which is actually really a grey, of the white parts of the teapot, the actual teapot itself, and then there's the print on it. I think it's printed. I don't think it's painted. The print of the willow pattern, and that has a lot of variation within it. But I'm just going to mix. So I've got 2 locals really, and I'm going to mix a light and a shadow for each. So let's get a shot of that because it's got a bit dirty now. So the teapot itself, the light parts of the teapot are very, very, very close to neutral. And for the light, I'm thinking not so much about what value it actually is and what value it appears. I'm thinking about what value I need it to be in here. So I need the light part of the teapot to be a lower value than this, right? So that highlight stands out. And it's pretty much a neutral. And thankfully, being a Munsell kind of guy, I can mix neutrals very easily because I've done a lot of it. I'm going to be close to neutral, but I'm going to allow a little bit more raw umber just to give it a little bit of hue, warmth. So, you know, talking about, that's like somewhere in the middle, right? So I need the light part of the teapot needs to be a lower value than that, which is my highlight, okay? I need the highlight to show. probably go a little bit lighter than that. So I'm having to compress the values, and I'm thinking in terms of the relationships all the time. And I'll show you how I'm going to find where I think the shadow value will be. So I just need to make sure for that the highlight shows, okay? So that will be a pretty good, it's near neutral, and that should be a pretty good value for that part of the teapot. So that's the light part of the teapot. And it should pretty much match the value here, and it pretty much does, you know. I need to make sure that still shows. So for the shadow side, the way I'm going to think about that is that I'm going to find a shadow side of the white part of the teapot, like round here, and I'm going to get a value chip out, and I'm going to angle it. What I'll also do, this is a really useful thing to do, get a piece of card with a hole in it, put them together, and then I'm going to hold it over that part of the, I'll show you on the painting, but I'm going to do this on the subject. You see, if I angle this, one way or another, the value of the chip changes. So there it's darker, there it's about the same. There it's darker, the chip is darker, there the chip is lighter. And I'm going to do that process until I get an exact visual match with that shadow. And then I'm going to see what else in the painting is the same value. The cast shadow is way darker. The closest value match I've got is up here. So I want it to be roughly the same value as that. So funnily enough, actually, I'm probably, you know, this is roughly the same value. So I can start with something like that. I'm going to add a little bit of raw umber because there's going to be some ambient light. So it will have a little bit more chroma in. So as I go down the value range, it's going to have a little bit more chroma. So that's helped me kind of plot out, if you like, what value the shadow side is going to be. And then obviously I can modulate between them, you know. Between them is going to be in between them. That sounded so wrong. You know what I mean? This is a bit lighter, and then I've got my anchor points, you know, so I can start to think about what value is going to go where. Try and get the shapes right and get things in the right place, and you know, should be able to make the teapot. Without doing a whole lot of painting. So like here I've got shadow inside the handle. Got this value. Now what's interesting though is that's almost the same value as the cast shadow here. So I've got a difficult relationship here, because this value should be about the same as that. So I've brought this down too far out of the range, but I'm going to live with it for a little while and see if I can make it work, because I want these flowers to pop. Otherwise, my other choice is that I can bring this value down and that value down, which I may do. And part of the check that I use is to see if the form starts to happen. You know, even if I'm painting something very simply, I start to get a feeling of the form. So that's interesting, because I've darkened the background. I may well be able to get away with just having the background darker, maybe not, we'll see. So for the blue, now it's actually, that's ultramarine, which is a reddish blue anyway, but it's more purple than that. It was quite difficult, by the way, when I was taking the photograph of this. I'm going to put a bit of black in, which is a low chroma blue, because the chroma is not full strength. when I took the photo, I had to do quite a bit of colour correction to try and get this colour close to what it actually is on the teapot. It came out too much of a green blue in the photo and I had to mess with it quite a bit. That I think it's all right, but I think it's a bit too high chroma. It's too high chroma. So just black and titanium white, I can drop the chroma easily for that. So that would be like the dark, the shadow. And I fix that lower because it's a lower value than this. You know, I'm trying to keep a kind of roughly a value plan. I tend to lay out the colors over here in terms of value from light to dark. And if because I've got a tricky subject here, if I'm mixing carefully like I am at the moment and trying to be very careful of the value balance of the picture, I'll kind of plan it as light to dark here too. It depends how difficult I think the subject is going to be. This one is going to be hard, so I mean, it's likely that I'll make mistakes if I'm not very careful. So I'm just trying to be, you know, this is like me at my most careful. Well, no, that's not true. Sometimes I'm more careful than this. If I'm doing a cube study or a sphere study, I'll be even more careful than this. And basically spend almost no time painting and spend almost all the time, that's gone too violet, spend almost all the time mixing. Drop the chroma. Right. So I've got light and shadow. So I'll get some down and then I'm going to stand back and judge it and see how I feel about it. With little brushes. These are Cornelison's Hog Velvets, by the way. And what I generally do if I remember before I paint with the brush is dip it in some oil and then wipe it off just to work it in. So the shadow, well, the shadow down here, around here is going to be, it's dark. So this is like the darkest, like the darkest dark in the painting too. Obviously there's variation within it, so there's light parts of the pattern that are in shadow and dark parts of the pattern that are in light. And I will just find those as I go, you know. Mostly I want to get it generally right. So I'm looking for shadow. Dark parts in shadow really at the moment. If I'm going too low, it's difficult. I feel very much at the moment, because I've been painting generally with a lighter value balance, I feel very much that I want to bring these values up. But I want those flowers to pop more in this one, so I'm trying to constantly remind myself not to do it. Light. Lighter than that. So I'm still, I mean, these things help, but they don't, mixing this way and being careful about the mixes like this doesn't mean that you still have to learn to draw, you still have to learn to paint. You know, it makes a lot of stuff go easier, but it doesn't absolve you of the need to practice and learn, you know. it doesn't mean that a beginner can follow this method and get the same results. You get a damn sight closer than you will any other way, if you ask me. But you know, you still have to learn to paint. It's a bit more green than I wanted it. I don't know. It'd be all right. And there's shadow falling on it, like around here. There's a lip where it stands up, and there's shadow falling on the pattern there. So I'm not trying to paint the pattern, I'm trying to paint light and shadow, you know. And even the dark bits as we get around here will be getting a bit lighter. Try and get these shapes. I just want the overall shape, really. I'm not really painting, I'm just rolling the brush on. And there's a really nice deep shadow, like right here, where there's a cast shadow from the handle onto the surface of the teapot, right there. And there's the shadow back here is slightly lighter there, slightly lighter. The shadow on the cloth there is slightly lighter. It's just a very small difference, but got nowhere for my cloth. Yeah, the value balance I'm finding a bit troublesome. Moment. It's bothering me that the shadow part of the handle here should be roughly the same value as this, slightly lighter but not much. Pattern, I've got pattern on the top here, which is, it's not shadow but it's fairly dark. So as long as I make sure that I don't go down to my deepest shadow colour, I should be all right. Notice as well that I use a different brush for everything, even like a different brush for the light and shadow, so just hopes to keep the colours running out of that colour there. See that? No, it definitely needs to be darker. I'm going to have to go lower value here, otherwise the value balance isn't going to make sense. Just because I've dropped the value here, I'm going to have to go lower. Otherwise the form isn't going to work, I don't think. Bring it down there. Bring it down here. It's got to go down. And there, shadow. Shadow. And down here the white parts are in shadow here, but they're slightly lighter because there's reflected light coming through on them. It mostly shows us like a slightly higher value, slightly lower chroma area. Slight shadow here, not that dark. There's reflected light here too. Bring that down a bit. This is too light against this, I think. This is the kind of, I think of it as a kind of a dance, you know, I'm just trying to get the relationships right to make things work. Cast shadow. And there's a beautiful area here where everything just kind of disappears. Side of the teapot, it all just is so similar in value there. It's just an area of almost a single value, very close. You can't really see the edge of anything where something stops and something else starts. I love those parts in the painting. I tend to emphasize them. I've got a bit of pattern in shadow in the middle of it. Some pattern on here. So I'm not trying to replicate the pattern there at all, you know, only in just the vaguest, only in the vaguest way. I just want to, what I'm trying to think about mostly and trying not to lose is the value balance as a whole. You know, I can add as much detail as I want later, but if the values are wrong, then this teapot is not going to sit there. It's just going to look utterly wrong. Oh my, there's too much light. My camera's blown out. I'm going to bring it down, the exposure down a bit. Well, the palette's really blown out. The sun is coming around now, so everything's getting a little bit too overexposed. Sorry, I'll catch up with the comments in a second. I'm just in a really fascinating part of the painting now, you know, so it's hard to keep up with comments at the same time. Go gradually down the values as I move around here. And there's a bit around this side where it drops chroma. I think there's some reflected light and it becomes almost the same as that cast shadow there. Alvaro, hello, you're from Brazil. That's wonderful. Thanks for joining. Joanna from South Africa, hello. Do you ever glaze your work? Yes, sometimes. If I want to make little adjustments at the end, yes, sometimes I will. I will glaze, yeah. I think the cameras are still a little bit blown out. I'm going to bring them down a bit more. The sun is coming around, so we're... How's the palette? Is it all right? Does it look like it looks a little bit blown out? Very rare I need to drop them this far. Sorry, let me catch up on the comments. Yes, unfortunately it is right. If you want to get serious about this way of painting and handling colour and understanding colour, you've got to get the Munsell book. But what I'd advise, because it's quite an investment, £1,000, you know, it's a big investment. What I would always advise is to get the student book first, which comes with a much smaller number of chips, just printed, not painted. They're just printed on card, and you can go a long way. I worked with that book for 2 years before I was sure that I was going to continue with this way of understanding colour. So, you know, thankfully there's that, and you don't get the 4th edition because it's horrendous. You could get the I'm losing too much chroma, I think. Get the too dark. Sorry, hang on. Get the 2nd, the 3rd are good. The 5th is can be okay. Some people have found the 5th to be all right, and some people have had bother with it. What the problem is with them, with the 4th and 5th, but much more the 4th than the 5th, is the chips get stuck together. They don't print them. It's either the way they print them, or they don't let them dry properly before they make them into books or something, and the chips stick together. But you get the Munsell value scale in there, and you can learn so much about value using that. I've got a bunch of stuff on my website. If you go to Google and put in Munsell value studies as a search, you'll find a series of posts I did when I first started working with this stuff about 10 years ago, after I'd just met Graydon Parish, maybe a bit more than that now, and he introduced me to it. And basically I've never looked back. So I worked probably with the Munsell book for about 2 years, about a year with value. And then continued on with, started working with chroma and, God, I love painting. It's endlessly fascinating. Chroma and hue. And I just painted a lot of cubes and spheres, you know, and that's how I started to understand how colour changed from light to shadow. That's too dark. And I, you know, still daily I learn new things about colour. Like at the moment I'm really focused on the link between value and chroma. And I'm finding that endlessly fascinating, and painting relational values, and, you know, so I'm not matching. I think a lot of the time there's this idea that with Munsell you match, and that is where I started, and I learned a huge amount from that, and I am getting as close as I possibly can to the local colours. But then what you do with it, once you've got those colours right, is up to you, the value balance that you choose. You know, you might choose to drop the chroma or raise it, you know, it gives you more expressive possibilities, I think. Knowledge and skill is never, never going to restrict you. Not understanding something is what will restrict you. That's how I feel personally, anyway. Sorry, I'll get back to the comments in a minute. I'm really, really enjoying this part of the painting. Because it's starting to, this is the bit where most of the panel is covered, and I'm starting to see how it's going to work. And also I feel like it's starting to get a feel to it that I really like. The light is starting to appear, you know. Sorry, I'll check the comments. Oh, we're getting overcast. Now I'm going to have to bring the cameras back up again. It's slightly frustrating this, but I'd rather this than have them auto adjust, because they never get it right. So it does tend to be a little bit all over the place. Let me bring the contrast up a little bit now. Make that easier to see. Yeah. So I don't think I have gone too dark here. I like it. But I also like all of this. You know, I find this quite expressive, all of this loose brushwork around here. So I'm going to leave that if I possibly can. But I'm going to work a long way into this teapot, and especially these flowers, you know. But I suppose if I wanted you to take one thing from this, I'm being so careful about the colour, and I'm painting very simple shapes. You know, I'm not painting any detail. I'm trying to make sure that the whole thing is going to work before I go in and start trying to refine anything and paint any detail, you know. I'm kind of thinking that I might want to put some leaves, some stems in soon. The teapot is far enough through for me to see it at least, where it's sitting. So this is another point for me really my white has got dirty. It's another point for me to slow down and stand back and think about the value balance. I had to bring these values down to be closer to the background, I had to. Otherwise the form of the teapot wouldn't really have worked. Sorry, I'm ignoring you all. I'll come back to the comments now. Jim, you say you're not seeing the chat updating. Oh, Jim, the reason for that is that I pay for a service, an online service called Restream, which allows me to stream to Facebook and YouTube at the same time. So a lot of the comments are on Facebook. In fact, there are a lot more people watching on Facebook than on YouTube, which is why sometimes I'll be answering comments that you don't see. Christy says, I'd be interested in how you mix white for white flowers without making them too neutral. I'm sure the Munsell book would help with this. Absolutely. That's what I would do. I would find the local. I mean, you would look at these daffodils, the radial leaves, and you would say that, you might say they're white. Like roses, you look at white roses, they're not white, they're yellow. They're 2.5Y. Usually, they're 2.5Y. That's just what they are. And, you know, our visual systems aren't made for being able to judge those things. So, you know, it's not as if it's surprising that we find it difficult. I want a bit more definition here. And that's where the book will really help. And I do believe that it will get you to where you want to be, to being able to paint with good colour way, way quicker. You know, it's not the only way to do it. I'm not going to tell you that you can't do it without it, which would be a nonsense, right? Because there are plenty of, well, there aren't plenty, but there are a good amount of very highly skilled painters out there make beautiful work that don't use it. And obviously, you know, all of the old masters didn't use it because it wasn't around then. The system was only invented at the turn of the last century. But that's not the question. The question isn't whether you can manage without it. The question is it better with it? And the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is a resounding yes. You will make more progress more quickly. You will understand colour better. And it will answer a lot of things that you find difficult and struggle with. That's been my experience anyway. Yeah, Renee, yeah, I generally start, it's 7 a.m. I'm sorry about that. I think now that our clocks have now gone forward though, so I have more daylight, so I might take them back to 4. Would that be good? If I took it back, it would be 10 o'clock. No, it would be an 8 o'clock start for you on the West Coast. Would that be good? Let me know if you'd prefer it, and I might do that. Yeah, Olaf, the neutral is, that's control of the chroma, which the more I paint, the more I think it's almost as important as value. Because you can't really separate, if you're dealing with full colour like this, you can't really separate one from the other, you know. I want some more chroma. I definitely want some more chroma. I want some more here. I know I'm close to the colour, I'm just saying I want some more. So I'm just going to put a couple of notes of like, pure paint way higher chroma just to really show that bit of light there. Here there's a reflected light. Just a few touches. I do feel like it's starting to come to life now. Just used the wrong brush for that. So I'm not going to paint this flower much because I like the shape of it, but it's going right off the edge. Compositionally, I don't like it so much, so I'm going to be mostly focusing on going from light to shadow with these as they curve round, I think. And maybe the painting's going to be about the teapot more than the flowers. But when I put the detail in on the flowers, then they'll start to stand out more. Let me catch up. Lisa says, it all seems so complicated to someone who hasn't learned this method. I'm learning by watching you, but can you recommend some learning points in regard to learning to paint? One can practice. Yes, yes I can. Where I would start with value. Really, really nail value, and then what I would advise you to do is get hold of the Munsell student book, get hold of 11 cubes and 11 spheres. You can get styrofoam spheres and wooden or styrofoam cubes from a lot of art materials shops. Prime them with acrylic primer, acrylic gesso, and then paint, mix each separate value of the Munsell scale from the Munsell student book, and then paint each one of them a different value, plus one black one and one white one, and then paint studies of them until you're blue in the face. Put them in shadow boxes and paint them from life under natural light. You can use the value chips, just the same as I do here, and a piece of card or paper with a hole in it to check the values. You know, get them as close as you possibly can to what you see. That would teach you a huge amount about value. And everything else fits into value. Hue is like, to me, is like a part, it's the easiest part, it's the least important part of colour. It's value and chroma. You know, it doesn't matter if I paint the hue of this teapot more violet or more green blue. It doesn't matter, you know. You'll never see this teapot exact hue to that as long as it's consistent across the surface. It doesn't matter. But what does really, really matter is the value and the chroma. I did have a post. If you go into Google and do a search for a blue lemon, and you'll find a post I did a while back where I found the colours for a blue sphere and then painted a lemon with those colours, and then painted a yellow stripe down the middle of the lemon, and it just works. You know, if you can do that kind of stuff, then you're starting to get a feel for value and chroma. Yes, it takes a long time to learn. It takes a lot of practice, you know, but anything worthwhile does. Anything worthwhile takes. That's where I would start. That's where I started. Hello, little fella. I know it doesn't sound very inspiring, but it would teach you so much so that when you get to a point where you do understand that, then you can be inspired when you're painting. And you won't be struggling. Hopefully that makes sense. That's what I would recommend. And once you've done a bunch of, oh, camera's getting blown out again. Once you've done a bunch of value work like that, then move on to onto painting coloured cubes and spheres. The reason you do it that way is because it takes everything else out of the equation. The drawing is fairly simple, especially with a cube. And it's the most effective way to practice, to learn, is to take one element out in isolation from everything else. So you're not trying to make a beautiful painting, you're just learning about value. Does that make sense? Give yourself a smaller job to do. Value is the one really to get at first. The blue I'm using here is, I'm using ultramarine blue, which is a reddish blue, and I'm mixing it with quinacridone rose, which is a blue-red, because it's slightly violet, the blue. Hello, Alvaro. Yes, Jim, you're right. There is another chat stream, yes. All right, you've got me covered. Thank you. Thanks, Renee. Sharon says, I was wondering if you always use that brush grip. I find I don't have nearly as much control holding it that way. Yeah, yeah, you won't at first. That takes a bit of time to learn as well. I have an exercise I call breathing lines, and basically you get some oil painting paper. I should be able to show you this. And you get some paint, raw umber or something like that, you know, ivory black. Get some on the brush, wipe the brush off until it's mostly gone, and then on your paper, hold it like this, and then start at the top, breathe in, and as you breathe out, do a line down. Vary the pressure as you go and see how that feels. And then work across and do a load like that, and after a while you will start to build a facility. There's more exercises you can do, but that's a good place to start. I call it breathing lines. How do you match the light on the canvas and the light on your palette? I used to always have the palette beside the canvas like that, beside the panel. But in a way, like working with Munsell like this, it kind of absolves me of the need to do that because I'm guided by the chips. So I'm thinking in terms of the total value range that I've got here, you know. So I do all of my thinking here and then I put it onto the panel. So I find I don't really need to do that so much. You can't reach the value range that you see in nature anyway, you know. So, but also for me, because I'm working in natural light, so this is at a slight angle to the light, and so is my palette. There's fairly similar light on both. $8 AM would be wonderful. Right, yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll move back now, because our clocks went forward, so I have a bit more light in the day now. Studio Cat wants a pat. I know, big man, it's very boring, isn't it? Thank you, Alison. Will you be dropping the chroma of the single flower on the top? No, it was already quite low chroma. I might be dropping the value. You might have meant value. I might be dropping the value. But if I scan across like this value and this, they look pretty close to me. This, I'm going to leave it fairly loose. I'm going to focus on those ones more. And I'm not going to get to them till tomorrow because it's like I've been on almost 2 hours now. This is what happens when I get excited at this part of the painting, because now I think this painting is going to work, you know. Alvaro, that's such a nice thought. I always forget to say that. You know, this is what they always say on videos, isn't it? Like and subscribe. I always forget about that part. Yeah, if you want to do, if you'd like to share it on Facebook or wherever you are, and like, and obviously if you subscribe, then I'm doing these every day, so you won't miss those. So that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Pierre says, is the Munsell student book you're talking about the new Munsell student colour set? Yes, that is the one. That's the one. Don't buy the 4th edition. Be very careful. Buy the second or the third. Something, one of those. Listen, I need to take a break now. I need to have a cup of tea, and Studio Cat is demanding attention. I'm feeling fairly happy at this point that my main compositional areas are working all right in the overall value balance. So this kind of forward and back between the abstract composition and making sure that the values work, and it works three-dimensionally. I'm quite happy with that. I'm in love with this bit around here. I'm going to paint into the flowers more and into the teapot a bit more, but probably not that much because it's working fairly well. I need to put some leaves in, stems, and then we'll see where we are. But you know, at this point, I've worked really, really slowly. I mean, this is 2 sessions on this painting, and still a lot of it is unresolved. It looks that way, right? But I've got it to where I want it to be, where I think the painting is going to work, where the panel is covered. I've been very careful about the value balance. Probably won't change it much from here, and now it's just mostly about bringing things out, what I want to bring out more, mostly the flowers at this point. Yeah, breathing lines. I think I've got a video. I'm pretty sure I've got a video online for that somewhere. Have a good day, Renee, in the studio. Are you painting spheres today? You're very welcome, Lisa. You are very, very welcome. I love doing this stuff. I was so tired going into this stream today. Let me bring the cameras down even a little more than this. They're blown out again. I was so tired going into it today, but it's almost like you send energy down to me. And I love this stuff. I love streaming and I love explaining what I'm doing. And, you know, when people ask me questions and want explanations of stuff, I love all of that, you know. One of the beauties of this way of working, I think, is it doesn't inhibit your, oh, I've got to do that. I need a light and a shadow on this rim coming around here. It doesn't inhibit your expression at all. Like I work increasingly loosely. You know, you can work in a very finished and resolved way with this. Either will work. But I actually think that you're going to struggle trying to work really loosely if you don't have at least your values really good. You know, and this is just a much more effective and quicker way to. Wrong brush. Yeah, I'm going to do that later because I want a thin, slick line with a hard edge on it, so I'll get lead white out for that. You know this bit around the teapot here? I'm going to do that a little bit later. Joanna, thank you. What an amazing thing to say. Joanna says, I've learned more in the last hour than I've in a good few years. That's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. I don't know which is the cool kids. I think they're both of the cool kids. It doesn't matter if you're on YouTube or on Facebook. You know, I'll continue to stream on both. I can actually stream on even more ones. I can stream on Twitch and God knows what now, you know, all kinds of other ones too, but I think I'll probably just stick to these two for now. Yeah, the stream, Jim, it's not on my page. It's on my personal profile. So if you friend me or follow me, if you search for Paul Foxton, artist, it's not on my, I'm Paul Foxton 10, I think, or something like that on Facebook. It's not on my personal, it's not on my page, which I don't really use much. It's on my personal profile. Okay, thanks very much for watching, everybody. I'm going to stop the stream now, go and get myself a cup of tea and decide what I want to do next with this painting. I'll see you, I won't be streaming at the weekend, but I will see you on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I'll see you next week.